we were granted exclusive access to the heart of the Sinaloa cartel. When El Chapo was in power, and we had lunch with his mom, and it was like this ghost that he was moving around. I try to tell stories that are not easy to tell, and I find myself many times speaking with people that are incredibly dangerous.
My guest today is one of those journalists who dives into the shadows to uncover the stories the world would otherwise never see. A filmmaker and correspondent whose work has taken him from the drug wars of Latin America to conflict zones across the region. His films are raw, human, and fearless, shining a light on the people caught in the crossfire of power, violence, and corruption. He's a colleague, a fellow traveler in this trade we call journalism, and today we'll unpack not just the stories he's told, but how he tells them and what it takes to keep going back for more. Guillermo Galdos, welcome to my journalism toolkit.
Thank you very much, Jamal, for inviting me.
I would like to start by asking you, how did you get into journalism and documentary making? And was there a moment that, you said, this is what I wanted to do?
Listen, I've always been, I think, a storyteller. I had a lot of street, life when I was a kid, growing up in Peru first and then in Chile. And I remember when I was finishing school, I was already writing some pieces for the school magazine. And then, I went into university in Chile, and actually I was studying a mixture of social science and law. And at the end, I finished my social sciences and I went to London and I did a postgraduate diploma in European journalism. And when I was at the London College of Printing, there was a big board, that had ads for jobs. And I saw that they were looking for an intern to APTV. I remember grabbing the paper and going to APTV, presenting myself, and just getting my first job as a journalist.
How do you decide which stories to chase? And do you follow your instinct, or you look at the headlines and say, this is the story I need to do, or there is personal connections? And how do you decide what stories to do?
Well, I think my background comes from an agency background. And when I started working at AP TV at that time, before it turned ETN, I was, working on the Latin American desk. So I was dealing with all the correspondents in Latin America. And then I will travel when there were special events. For example, the Pope was visiting Mexico, or there was a massive earthquake in Nicaragua, or there was a kid in Peru. I don't know. So I was like moving around. And then I had a chance when AP TV turned into APTN. We inherited a program from WTN. That program marked a lot because basically, I traveled alone with my camera around the world. I tell 15 stories, and with a very reduced budget that will include your ticket, your accommodation, and whatever you was getting from the story. So with Robin Report, I had the opportunity to travel the world. And I think that's when I started, I fell in love with telling stories and being a one-man band. And I had a very good friend that actually convinced me to do that. His name was Miguel Hill. He was killed in Sierra Leone, some years ago. And Miguel said to me, man, buy yourself a camera and go out and tell stories.
Obviously, some stories are easy to find, others are more difficult to pull off, and other stories that you feel, was almost impossible to do and you pulled off.
Listen, I've covered all sorts. Obviously, coming from an agency, you do a lot of breaking news, and that's what I, got used to at the beginning. But then I think I became more like the Kapuczynski of filmmaking, in the sense that I like living the story. and I didn't like to arrive when something had happened, an earthquake, and then you go and cover the misery of the event. I liked going into people's homes. And for example, I was filming something in Brazil, and I was staying in quite near the beach in Copacabana, and I asked my fixer if I could stay at his house in his favela, and he obviously invited me to his house. I remember he gave me the room.
Yeah.
I went out and see, the nightlife in the favelas and all that. And it was a complete different experience. And I also felt how, my friend and his family were feeling as civilians in the middle of this war in between them and the police. And I would say that that's the way I work. That's the way that nowadays, I try to tell my stories. I try to tell stories that are not easy to tell, and I find myself, many times speaking with people that are incredibly dangerous, but they are as human as I am.
How do you negotiate access? How do you win the trust of strangers? How, do you convince people to let you into their lives?
I think that you need to have something enabled to do that, because it is a very thin balance into being uncomfortable, for the other person to have you there, and they can think whatever about you. I think that the way I do it is I treat the person. It doesn't matter who it. If it's a peasant from the mountains in Colombia or the president of Mexico, equally. And you try to make them understand that you're equal, and then you speak with honesty. I think that for me, that's been my key tool to be able to go inside houses, go inside families, and tell stories that many times are very difficult to tell. And I'm going to put you an example. I did, as I filmed a series for HBO about the murder of a Mormon family in northern Mexico. The cartels murder 9 women and children, and they were American. So it was a very delicate story. And I remember going to the funeral, being there, but not filming anything, just being there, trying to feel the same pain. And then months later, I went back and I said to them, and they had been approached by many media outlets. And I said to them, listen, these are my credentials. I would like to tell the story. I will, and this is the way I do it. And after months, I spent months with them in the mountains of Chihuahua. And at the end, I even managed to interview
Yeah.
2 kids that were survivors of the massacre. And the parents allow me to revisit the story with them without, it being painful for them, and the way we did it. And they were really happy with the content, and they were really happy with the series, and it was very delicate. And I think that's very important to do.
Often you go and meet big drug lords who are wanted by authorities, by the US and everybody. And how do you win their trust? How would they let you interview them?
Well, do you see why I have so much gray hair? That's that. It is dangerous. Yes, I'm going to accept it. But you just need to go, and the 2 things that you need to make sure that they understand and they know. First of all, that you're not working for the authorities. And the second thing is that, yes, there is like a sort of code that one needs to respect. But that doesn't make me less of a journalist. I understand the code, and I understand that there are some things that I cannot publish from our conversation, and there are some things, and it's not that I'm publishing what they want. No, but there I know, and now listen, I'm writing, so at one point all those things will come out. What I do understand with these guys and what I've seen, and this impresses me a lot, is that I've met the organizations that the authorities are saying that they are heading. So to put you on with El Chapo, I don't think El Chapo was the head of this massive organization that operates in so many countries, and operates everywhere. He's the face of the organization. He's the brand. He shows the brutality. But that organization wouldn't be an organization if you wouldn't have, politicians, the military, the police, the corrupt lawyers, the corrupt banks. So I think that's a hypocrisy. And the way I communicate with these guys is I'm completely honest, completely frank. And I tell you, I've met people who I haven't been able to interview because I said to them, I need to ask these two questions, and their answer was, I'm afraid I cannot answer those two questions on camera. So I said to him, I'm not going to interview you in that case. I won't function as your puppet to communicate out whatever you want. Is if you give me these questions that for me are crucial. And I've had the situation with more than one trafficker or more than one criminal where that has been the case.
Do people often ask you, how was it meeting with the big man, El Chapo? Do people ask you quite a lot?
At the end of the day, what we granted, and I'm going to put it to you this way, we were granted exclusive access to the heart of the Sinaloa cartel. This was when El Chapo was in power, and we had lunch with his mom, and it was like this ghost that he was moving around. It is incredibly easy to arrest this guy. And what he was going through my head is, you see that his bodyguards are off their heads using cocaine and drinking alcohol to begin with. It's not like a professional army that is like you have with the president. No, this is a bunch of young kids. And when I spoke with them, the thing that marked me a lot was that I was coming from a background where I had interviewed guerrilla groups in Colombia, FARC, whatever, and you see people, that is fighting in the jungle that are fighters. That are people that have dedicated their lives to do that. What I saw in Mexico was not very professional, to be honest. And I thought, like, this is ridiculous. And I remember a story that marked me a lot. And it was the story of a man that I don't want to say names, and was very close to the brother of El Chapo, to a guy called Guano. And that guy had lost a kid, and he was buried very close to where we were in the mountains in Sinaloa. And his other son had a car accident, and he was in a wheelchair as well in the mountains. And there was a group of 8-9 guys that hang around with this guy, and they were the guys that were managing El Chapo security and were managing basically what ran up in the mountains. And when I finished filming, I was called by one guy up there, and they said to me that, after El Chapo, because El Chapo had been put in prison and he was released, and he accused this guy of killing someone that he shouldn't have killed. And El Chapo sent this guy to get killed, plus his 7 or 8 bodyguards. And I remember watching the footage. They were incredibly young, and they were there because that was the only option that they had. They always grew up with watching men with weapons and the macho thing, and the guy that has the biggest weapon is more macho and using cocaine and feeling like you're on top of the world and buying your car. But I always asked them because they were asking me, they were curious, they were asking me, how's London? Which country you like the most? they were curious about that, and I was incredibly sad to see all that footage and to realize that the 10 kids that I had in front of me had been killed, and had been killed
Yeah.
by an order from El Chapo, and I always thought that he was not as I said, the head of the Sinaloa cartel. I mean, he was a pistolero. He was a hitman that turned into a guy that moved a lot of guys and control a lot of territories, but he wouldn't be anyone.
And often when you meet them, they're just like normal people. And before you meet them, you think they're some creatures from somewhere else. But when you meet them, they're like like everyone else. I also want to ask
Yeah,
you, you prepare things beforehand, you plan. When you are in the field, sometimes things go accordingly, but often, as we know, things go wrong. How do you fix all these problems and how do you overcome all these issues?
I trust my inside feeling, and yes, and I don't plan because everything changed. I just I don't have a
Yeah.
format as well. I'm just open to surprises, and obviously, you have to overcome difficulties. All I'll put you an example with another drug trafficker that I interview in Mexico. I interview a guy that was the head of the Caballeros Templarios. He was the Mexican version of Breaking Bad, and he was working with the Chinese. And I went to interview him. There were a few thousand soldiers looking for him. When I arrive, he's so high on coke that I need to tell him, listen, man, thank you very much for the invitation. I cannot interview you like that. You will not make any sense. You will be incredibly angry with me. And that's not the reason why I've come. I really. So he said to me, he appreciated my words. He made me drink a couple of whiskeys, and I left. And I said to him, I'm leaving. And I can tell you a thing. If you want to speak with me in 2 days, I will be ready to go to whatever the place is. And he did. I did interview. I arrived and he was completely, he looked like he just came out of the shower, everything. And I remember him saying to me, I'll give you the interview. Thank you very much. The other day I was high. I apologize for that. Then after that, we drink that bottle of whiskey. And I said, okay. So, he gave me the interview. We had a long chat. He told me how he had killed people, how he was the father of more than 100 kids, how people offer him his young daughters. It was crazy.
Are there moments that you felt, oh, something might go wrong, or you tend to trust them if they invite you and just, do your job? How do you go about it in terms of safety?
I don't trust them ever. I don't trust them ever. I mean, I'm honest, but I've been in situations where I've been granted access. I've been interviewing somebody, and suddenly I heard on the radio that they called that guy and they said to him, why have you brought these guys in? The big boss knows about it, and
Wow.
he wants to speak ASAP, and watch out because they can kill you. I've been and I had vision on the radio, and supposedly I had access granted. I don't never give anything for granted, and I'm honest, but I have my concerns, and for so many years I was, or I thought I could change something in the war on drugs with my work. Nowadays, I'm convinced that I'm not going to change anything. And that makes me sad on one hand, but on the other, it has given me other options. For example, I'm very worried about the Amazon. And that's something more maybe tangible for me or for my next generation, that my kids and my grandchildren manage to see a river.
I think, as you said, most of us are into journalism to change the world. After years, you realize your power is limited, what you can and can't do, and you become more realistic. But I still think, I mean, we are doing it to, have an impact, positive impact on the world. And so I want to ask you this other question. When you're on the ground, you're a journalist, your instinct is to get the best you can get, but it's also dangerous. How do you make the decisions? How far you push when you're dealing with traffickers, drug loads, or whoever you're dealing with? How do you make that decision? How far you push?
I push very far. I think I'm a bit of a pusher, and nowadays with kids, and stuff, it's not that I push less. I push in a different way. I know when to push, when to hold on, when to push, when to hold on. But I'm the type of guy that stays longer because I go to a place and I think we're not going to do this in 4 days. No way. We need 7. That sort of. I need to go home and cancel stuff and say like tell the kids that next week I will go whatever to the stadium with him. I've and the problem, Jamal, is that, and I'm sure the same happens to you. I like so much what I do. I think that's the trick.
Once you do the story and it goes out post transmission, the story doesn't stop there. A lot of things happen, especially in today's social media. As you said, authorities
Yeah,
stopping you, people might be criticizing or saying
yeah,
something.
yeah.
What happens after the story goes out, the reaction?
I'll tell you, I'm using less and less social media, but obviously the outlets that I work for, I've received stories from people not being uh, happy, and they've thrown me, and yes, and actually we had a thing with one of the sons of El Chapo. El Chapo lost a son on the early days in Culiacan, and his son was killed by his men by mistake. And there is a big mausoleum, and we went to film to the mausoleum, and we asked permission to him, and but his former wife did not agree, and she went after us, and she sent me death threats, and she said, listen, and I had to go and face the problem and actually speak with the grandmother, and send a message, and the grandmother said, listen, he was given permission by the father, so it's not his fault that there's a problem between former wife and husband.
Journalism at this level demands a lot, physically, mentally, emotionally. What kept you going?
I think I do sports. I've gone to therapy a little bit as well, not as much as I would like to. I think is very good. It certainly helps, telling stories, because I remember, speaking with friends and saying to me, I don't want to listen to that. It's like, I don't want to listen, an earthquake where you saw, 5 kids there and the mother crying. Hear that. I don't want to hear the
Mm.
story of this left wing, guerrilla terrorist. I'm not into it. And I have a lot of that. So I have a couple of friends who are journalists. We do speak about it. I think sports is incredibly important. And for me in particular, I think is it contents me, and it makes me feel alive, to be honest.
And I think, after all, as you said, if you love what you do, if you believe in it, then I think more than anything else, that would keep you going, isn't it?
Yes, sometimes, funny enough, I remember years ago, and thinking when I was working, and wow, these people don't know that I will do this job for free. I love it so much. and then I felt incredibly lucky. I think that what I want to do now, and I think that you are actually contributing with your work to do that, is to pass knowledge.
And looking ahead, what kind of stories do you still want to tell? I can mention a few stories that I've been trying to tell, and after many years, I'm still trying it. So, are there stories that you think you want to tell before you probably
Uh,
call it a day?
yeah, I would like to do more in the Amazon. I'm trying to do something big. I've been thinking as well, and I just came from a film festival and I saw an amazing film of a friend, which is a love story. And I think that we should highlight love more. I'm not saying that the other stories are not interesting or this is soft. No, no, no. I think that love is incredibly powerful, and love stories are undertold, and I think I'm looking at that and hoping there are no wars on this side of the world, and hoping for the best and preparing for the worst.
Guillermo, thanks very much. I know our audiences will take away not only the stories, but the spirit behind them. A reminder that journalism at its best really can shine a light in the darkest places. Gracias, companion. Compañero. I want to say gracias, compañero. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you very much. Always a
I've been practicing all day. Thanks very much for
pleasure.
your time, my brother.
Take
Thank you.
care.